essa plenária final aqui do Congresso, que eu, embora não tenha podido participar esses dias que já aconteceram, já soube que foi um sucesso, tem sido um sucesso. E eu acho que é extremamente importante, depois desses vários dias em que vocês tiveram a oportunidade de conhecer várias técnicas, várias ferramentas, de discutir aspectos relacionados ao dia a dia do trabalho de vocês, concluir esse seminário vitorioso, esse congresso vitorioso, com uma palestra dos maiores especialistas hoje no mundo sobre esse tema de novas mídias e do mundo digital, porque isso abre para a profissão de bibliotecário e todos que lidam com a informação uma perspectiva bastante diferente, ampliam as perspectivas profissionais de vocês, né? A gente certamente já tiveram a oportunidade de conversar sobre isso, mas a gente está vivendo um momento único. A gente não se dá conta disso, mas nós somos uma geração, todo mundo que está nessa sala aqui faz parte de uma geração privilegiada, uma geração que vai viver em 2 milênios diferentes. Poucas pessoas têm ocasião de viver em 2 milênios diferentes. Se nós estamos vivendo em 2 milênios. Não é só um problema de matemática, é um processo de transição que nós estamos vivendo. São momentos que são raros de acontecer na história da humanidade. A gente já viveu um período de transição de uma sociedade tipicamente agrícola, da era agrícola para a era industrial, e hoje nós estamos vivendo o privilégio de ser coautores desse processo de transição de uma era tipicamente industrial para a era da informação e do conhecimento. E vocês são profissionais da informação. Se vocês se olham dessa forma, os horizontes certamente são muito mais amplos e muito mais venturosos. Então, ninguém melhor do que o professor Jeffrey Cole para vir aqui nos instigar, nos provocar. Eu não tive a ocasião ainda de conhecê-lo pessoalmente, mas pela internet, vendo vídeos que ele fala. Então, como ele é a estrela, nós vamos começar com a apresentação dele, ele vai ter 1 hora para falar, e depois a gente vai compor uma mesa com a doutora professora Ivana Bentes, minha colega na Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro, e o professor Jesus Lau, que vocês certamente conhecem, mexicano, presidente da Associação dos Bibliotecários lá do México. Mas primeiro nós vamos ouvir então o professor Cole. Ele é diretor do recém-criado Centro para o Futuro Digital, professor pesquisador da Universidade do Sul da Califórnia, Annenberg School for Communication, especialista na área de tecnologia e novas mídias, e ele é consultor de governos, foi consultor de vários governos dos Estados Unidos, Clinton, depois do Bush, e grandes empresas também, na elaboração de suas estratégias digitais. Então, com vocês, com a palavra, o professor Cole.
Thank you. I apologize for the English. I'm starting to love Brazil so much. This is my 5th visit that I intend to learn some Portuguese, but I don't think we'd get very far today, but I'm motivated. No, I am so thrilled to be here. Each time I come to Brazil, this feels more and more like the center of the universe. The 9% economy, the most popular president on the planet. My president was as popular as Lula the day he was elected, but unfortunately not so much today. A 9% economy, the World Cup, the Olympics, it's always exciting to be in Brazil. So thank you very, very much for having me. I'm going to talk about how digital technology is changing our lives. And of course you know that because there's few places that are changing as much as libraries have changed just over the last 5 years. So before I talk about some of the change we see, let me take about 3 minutes and tell you who I am and what I do so that you can understand where my insights, my data come from. I'm an old television guy. I've spent most of my life in and around television the most powerful medium ever invented. And in the work I did in television, I was always taught that we lost a great opportunity where television was concerned. Television's the only mass medium we knew ahead of time was going to be a mass medium. There was no question in the 1940s and 50s that radio listeners were going to embrace radio with pictures. We knew television was going to be a phenomenon before the first signal was ever broadcast. And what I was taught that we should have done but didn't do is we should have tracked people before they had television, and then gone back to them year after year as they acquired and used television to see how it changed their lives. And if we had done that, we would have learned some pretty compelling things, starting with where did the time for television come from? When Brazilians, Americans, Europeans, Asians were watching 3 hours of television a day, and we were asked where did that time come from, we didn't know. We just grabbed that time out of the air. We could have learned if the time for television came from talking as a family, reading books or newspapers, going to the library, sleep, or from some other place. And I became convinced in the late 1990s that the impact of digital technology, first the web and now mobile phones, would be far more powerful than television. Television's still mostly about leisure and entertainment, and the web and mobile have transformed for almost all of us how we work, how we play, how we communicate, and I think its greatest long-term impact is going to be how we learn. So believing that we lost a great opportunity with television and that the impact of digital was going to be even more powerful than television, 10 years ago we launched this massive project, this study, this tracking of digital that we thought should have been conducted of television in the 1940s. And very briefly, we started in the year 2000 in the United States. We've gone back to the same people 10 years in a row, and we watched them and their lives as they went from non-users to dial-up, and then as many of them went from dial-up to broadband. And we saw broadband changed everything, not as much because of the speed, but it's the always-on, the direct connection that changes the whole relationship to the web, has led to it becoming, for users, their most important source of information. We watch as about 2% drop off the web each year, and we want to know who are these people who leave and why, and more importantly, do they return, and if so, when and what brings them back. And then 10 years in, we continue to track the never users. Who are the people who have never gone online? Why? And increasingly a question we're starting to ask, and Brazil is asking, should we care? Should we be trying to persuade them and get them online? Or should we let them live their lives peaceably and happily off of the web? And most countries are moving towards pushing people online. In some places, there's information you don't have access to. You're disadvantaged in jobs and other information if you're not online. So there's pushes to put people online. We started this work in the US. We're now doing it in 35 countries around the world. We're in all the places you would expect us to be in Europe and Asia and Latin America. We have some interesting, unusual partners. We have a great partner in Iran. We have a great partner in Israel. Our project may be one of the places where the Israelis and the Iranians get along the best. And I'm really happy to say we have a wonderful partner here in Brazil. Took us a couple of years. I had to come to Brazil 5 times, but I'm not complaining. It was great to come to do it. But we do have a great partner here in Brazil. And in Latin America, we have partners in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Mexico. So if any of you are from places beyond that, we would welcome the opportunity to work there as well. So that's a little bit of what I do, watching people, watching how their lives change as they become digital and looking not just at what they do online, but all of their offline lives. We want to know things like, do people through email and social networks now have friends all over the world, but at the cost or the expense of not knowing who lives next door to them? Fortunately, that doesn't seem to be true. When we started our work in 2000, there already were people arguing that internet users had red eyes because they were up all night rather than sleeping, that they're fatter because they're sitting in front of a screen rather than getting out, moving around, that they're more alienated, lonely, and depressed, and don't see other people as much. And those were some of the issues we wanted to look at. I'll tell you, though, we found, starting in 2000, that internet users get about an hour's less sleep over the course of a week. So there's not much difference. Internet users, we don't know if they're fatter or not, because when you interview people, they don't like it if you ask them how much they weigh. So we don't ask them that, but we do ask how much time they spend in sports or exercise. And we know that internet users spend about 30 minutes more a week in sports or exercise. Not a lot more, but importantly not less. And they seem to be a little less alienated, lonely, and depressed. Not a lot less, but importantly not more. So we have all these powerful trends we've looked at over 10 years, so I thought I would share a couple. And then in the question and answer period, you may want to get in and ask other things. You're welcome to ask about the things I'm going to talk about, but you may want to talk more about education or other issues, which I'm happy to do. But let me start with a couple of trends. One of the most powerful is what's happening to traditional media. When I used to teach, for those who have spent time in Los Angeles, I used to teach at UCLA. And I used to teach mass communication. And when I used to teach, I argued that no mass medium ever goes away or disappears. They adapt, they change. If ever a medium were going to go away, it would have been radio after the beginning of television. When television came along, it took all the content out of radio, it took all the stars from radio, but radio didn't roll over and die. It formed relationships with the music industry, and today radio is a vibrant and important medium, but it's a much smaller medium than it used to be. So as we look at all of our mass media, one of our themes is we think all media will survive, but most media will survive as smaller players in a digital era. They'll have to learn how to be smaller. Now, this has been going on for a generation already. If you look at theatrical film, going to the movies, I have the North American numbers. The Motion Picture Association confirmed the numbers are similar in South America, but they couldn't get me the exact numbers. But in North America, in 1946, we sold 4.3 billion movie tickets. Last year, the population had more than doubled since 1946. To keep pace with 1946, we would have had to sell 9 billion movie tickets. Instead, last year, we sold 1.4 billion. Put another way, 1946, 90 million people a week went to the movies. Last year, population was doubled, 22 million people a week went to the movies. Theatrical film, going to movies in the theater, has become a tiny business. It's still a high-profile business, a highly profitable business. It drives the home video business. It's not a coincidence that film reached its peak in 1946. That was on the eve of the introduction of television, which forever changed movies. The music business that all of us grew up with. The music business had a business model that was nothing short of extortion. The business model of the music industry says, you like 2 songs, you have to go out and spend $16, 30 reals on a CD. Today, interest in music has never been greater. More people are listening to more music in more places than they ever have before. And they're not going to the music store anymore. In most cities, you can't even find a music store. Our two flagship music stores in America, some of you may know from movies, Tower Records on Sunset Strip, closed 2 years ago. Virgin Megastore in Times Square, along with every other Virgin Megastore in North America, I think there's about 2 left in the world, closed last year. The Tower Records Piccadilly Circus in London, gone. And I haven't had a chance to walk around Rio yet. I'll do some of that tomorrow, but I have no doubt that it will be very difficult to find music stores. And even if they are here, I bet there were 10 times as many here 5, 6, 7 years ago. People aren't going to the music store and buying music. They're going online and either stealing the music or they're going to legal downloading services and spending $2 for the 2 songs they want. The depressing future of the music business, not music. Music has a great future. But the depressing future of the music business is that if they get it right, if they figure out how to get you to go online and buy, you and your children, they figure out how to get you and your children to go online and buy music, not steal it, and that's a big if, then what used to produce $16 for them will now produce $2. And that's if they get it right. Music is changing and becoming smaller, and we benefit from that. Recently, I pulled out my CDs. Turns out I have 400 CDs. I'm probably the last generation that will ever own 400 CDs. We think music is going to move into the cloud, and the concept of owning music will disappear. You'll pay a fee, and you'll have access to every song ever made, but you'll never have to touch it. Partially that's caused by environmental concerns. CDs are wasteful, the packaging is wasteful, and now we'll get music from the cloud. But as I looked at my 400 CDs, I did a quick examination, and I asked myself, how many of those CDs, if I could have bought them song by song, would I have bought more than 2 songs? And there was 18, 4%. So Pink Floyd's The Wall, if you know Pink Floyd's The Wall, I would have bought every song on Pink Floyd The Wall. But only 18% of my, only 18 or 4% of my 400 CDs would I have bought more than 2 songs. So as I was looking at my 400 CDs, I was seeing all this music I treasured. I was also looking at thousands of dollars I was forced to spend that I wouldn't have spent if I had a choice. And then print. We know that 30 years ago, teenagers didn't read newspapers. But they started to when they got into their 20s and 30s. Today, teenagers don't read newspapers, and the evidence is clear. They never will. Now, a lot of people look at that and say, well, teenagers, they just don't care about what's happening in the world. All they care about is what's happening on Orkut or Facebook or Twitter. Nothing could be further from the truth. Teenagers all over the world, more interested in news than any teenage generation in the last 70 years. They figured out that what happens halfway around the world can affect them. They're just not going to the newspaper for information. They're going online. One of the things we see, and I think this will be powerful in Brazil, and it is in other parts of Latin America and all over the world, when internet penetration gets to 30%, offline newspaper sales, printed newspaper sales begin to decline. So India, where internet penetration is at 13, 14, 15%, printed newspaper sales are skyrocketing or exploding. But in India, when it gets to 30%, as almost everywhere else when it gets to 30, it begins to decline. Even the heaviest newspaper reading society on the face of the earth, Sweden, newspaper sales are beginning to decline. The Swedes, there's 9 million Swedes. You could have twice that many all practically in Sao Paulo or almost in Rio. There's 9 million Swedes. They buy 13 million newspapers a day. Compare that to my country, and this does not make America look very good. 9 million Swedes, 13 million newspapers. 1.5 newspapers per day per Swede. America, we have 300 million people. We buy 39 million newspapers a day. Not very impressive. But even in Sweden, we're seeing these declines. The sad truth for printed newspapers is every time a newspaper reader dies, he or she is not being replaced by a new reader. 10 years ago, I was invited by the American Society of Newspaper Editors, who incidentally renamed themselves last year the American Society of News Editors. I was invited by the ASNE 10 years ago to talk to them about trends. And 10 years ago, in the year 2000, I went to their convention and I said, every time a newspaper reader dies, they're not being replaced by a new reader. And then I looked at them and I said, you have 25 to 30 years left. They called me dangerous. They called me an alarmist. They called me everything except what it turns out I was, which was not correct. I wasn't correct. I was an optimist. Because if I was right 10 years ago, that they had 25 to 30 years left, today they would have 15 to 20. In America, they have 5 years left. Most of them don't even have that. In Britain, 7 or 8. Australia, 9 or 10. We'll see in Brazil as we get our data from our partner. We know in America they're declining the fastest. San Francisco Chronicle lost 25% of its circulation in the last 12 months. My Los Angeles Times had a circulation of over 1 million 3 years ago. Now it's getting close to 600,000. In 1900, America had 600 communities that had 2 or more newspapers. Now we have 4. Instead of counting down the 2 newspaper towns, we're now starting to count up the no newspaper towns. We see that not just in the US, we see it a little faster in the US, but we're seeing this all over the world, as I said, including Sweden. Magazines, a little better news with magazines. We know that magazines that only contain news or information, Time or Newsweek in the US, Maclean's in Canada, Der Spiegel in Germany, they will be gone in 3 years. The internet does news much better than magazines do. The idea of getting your news once a week is not satisfying to most people. The internet's cheaper, easier, but some magazines will be around forever. Women's magazines. Magazines that women read as much for the advertising as the content. The pull and sniff perfume ads, you can't do that on the internet. The thick, beautiful paper. For a woman, the experience of reading Vogue magazine online is not very satisfying. The only advantage of the internet for women's fashion magazines is some of them weigh 1 kilo or 2. Some of them are 700-800 pages. If they were ever on the internet or iPads, they'd be easier to carry around. But we think most magazines move electronically as well. So all of these media survive. Most of them survive as smaller players. The exception is television. We think television will explode with growth, be bigger than it's ever been, escape from the home, and become our constant companion. Now, we really should create a better term than television. Television, to most of us, means that set in the home on a schedule. All television means in the future is audio and video. And keep in mind, as newspapers go on the internet, they become television. Because on the internet, newspapers aren't once a day delivered to your doorstep. On the internet, newspapers are not still photographs and no video. On the internet, newspapers are live and update constantly. Newspapers have video and audio. But television, watching things on television, going to explode with growth. And in the future, YouTube is as much television as Globo is here in Brazil, or as CBS is in America, or the BBC is in the UK. Our work shows fairly conclusively, and I don't use words like conclusively a lot, our work shows people will watch television on a small screen in their pocket or purse. Not just a 2-minute football clip or a movie trailer, but we see people watching 30, 60, 90-minute shows. Sometimes they'll watch them straight through if they're stuck at the airport waiting for a flight. Sometimes they'll watch a 30-minute show in 8 or 10 parts. Keep in mind that at the same time as we're putting these television screens in our pockets, we're putting bigger and better screens in our homes than we've ever had before. The gap between the theater and the home is narrower than it's ever been. The time gap between when something is in a theater and in your home is shorter than it's ever been. And we will save our preferred content for the big screen. About a year ago, I gave a talk, and there was a guy in the audience who raised his hand and said, "I'm a Canadian, and I'm a big hockey fan," which is pretty redundant if you think about it. The same way, I guess, Brazilian and football fan would be. And he said, "Why would I ever watch a hockey game on a mobile phone?" And the answer is, if you love hockey, you won't watch it on a mobile phone. You'll seek out the biggest and best screen you can find, unless you can't get to the big screen. And then, and it's more important to see it sooner rather than later, then you'll watch it on a mobile phone. Nobody's going to watch Avatar for the first time on a mobile phone. They may watch it for the second, third, or fourth time. We saw, in some of the countries we work, we saw people, even countries that were finalists in the World Cup, which I know Brazil will be in 2014, we saw people who were working and couldn't get away from work and had to, the people who would have loved to have watched the World Cup on a big screen, and they knew that if they didn't watch it by the time, and even if they recorded it, by the time they got home, they would know everything that happened. Those people said they preferred watching it on a mobile phone to not watching it at all. So as we watch television on a mobile, something very simple but important happens. Television escapes from the home. Television's never really existed outside the home until now. The exception's the hospital, but if you're sick, that's your home. The bar, for some people, that's their home. But television couldn't grow until now, because television already dominated our at-home awake time. Most of us turn the television set on the moment we enter the home, leave it on till we go to sleep. Some of us go to sleep with it on, and some of us leave it on when we're not at home so that people think we are at home. So television couldn't grow until now, but now we'll be watching television at the airport waiting for the flight, on the airplane itself, in the back seat of our cars, hopefully not the front seat while we're driving. And as we watch television everywhere and anywhere, it becomes our constant companion. Who's our constant companion now? If you're stuck at the airport waiting for a flight, most of us don't pull out books or newspapers, sadly. Most of us pull out our mobile phones and start calling people. And it's only after someone answers do we figure out whether we really have anything we want to say to them. My mother figured this out. My mother figured this out a long time ago. Whenever I call my mother, she'll say, "What? You're stuck somewhere? You have nothing better to do than to call me?" And she's right, but she also figured out, hey, it means we get to talk more often, and that's good. In 1975, around most of the planet where people had television, we spent 16 hours a week in front of a screen. Last year, it was up to 36 hours. The difference was 1975, it was one screen in the home on a schedule. Now it's 3 screens, with the television set as the first, the computer or the laptop as the second, and the phone as the third. And now, even though the iPad is not on sale yet in Brazil, I see them everywhere. Now the iPad, we're trying to determine, is it the 4th screen? Or does it replace the 2nd screen, the computer? I'm coming to believe that it replaces the 2nd screen. Not yet, but that's what's going to happen. We now know that the 36 hours, we think, right now per week, per person, we think will be over 50 hours in the next 3 or 4 years. Because, as I said, television couldn't grow in the home, but now it's growing outside. And teenagers, we now know with teenagers, there's practically not a moment of their lives, except when they're in school and asleep, that they're not in front of a screen. And I'm not so sure it's true that they're not in front of a screen when they're in school. They certainly are during lunch and recess, and I think more of them are in front of a screen during class than we'd like to admit. And as far as teenagers not being in front of a screen when they're asleep, we know that 80% of teenagers sleep within an arm's length of their mobile phones. So while they're not literally looking at it while they're sleeping, it is there. Incidentally, the excuse most of them use, when you ask them, you sleep next to your phone, they don't want to tell you because I'm afraid I'm going to miss something. They say, oh, I use it as an alarm clock. Anyway. Second trend, and I want to look at 2 trends and then look at teens for a little. Second trend, social networking. We believe social networking is the real deal, the real thing. Social networking is the first thing we've seen that has caused people to log on to the internet more than to check their email. Now, we think which community a teenager is in is a trend or fad. But we think the importance of social networking cuts across all ages, and I'll explain that in a moment. But as far as teenagers and a trend and a fad, 5 years ago, Rupert Murdoch and News Corporation bought MySpace. And they bought MySpace because they said it would allow them to reach teenagers in a way no other medium did. It's getting harder and harder to reach teenagers through television. So they bought MySpace, $580 million. And at the same time, about 2 weeks later, we were releasing our 5th annual report. And I was being interviewed by reporters who were asking me about the trends we were seeing globally in our 5 years. And then the last question was, what do you think about Murdoch buying MySpace? And I said it was a great investment. That part of the quote got lost forever. I said it was a great investment, but they would never be able to hang on to the teenage users of MySpace. And they got very angry at that, and they fought back, not by saying we were wrong, but by saying, look how much money MySpace is making. They're absolutely right. They paid $580 million. They made that back within a year. 2 years ago, AOL bought Bebo, a big British and Asian social network. 2 years ago, AOL bought Bebo for $850 million. They sold it earlier this